My name's Carol Lefevre. I'm the lead convener of the Cochrane Information Retrieval Methods Group. I used to be the Senior Information Specialist at the UK Cochrane Centre from its inception in 1992 until 2012, and I now work as an independent information consultant. I'd now like to ask the rest of the panel to introduce themselves, and if I could first of all ask Bernadette Coles if she would kindly introduce herself.
Hi everybody, good morning. My name is Bernadette, as Carol says. I'm the coordinator for the group. I've been the coordinator since 2005. I've been involved with Cochrane for a long time, since 2000 as a searcher, but I became a Cochrane Information Specialist for the Urology group in 2014. I actually work for Cardiff University. My actual day job is to run a library service for a specialist cancer centre.
Thank you very much, Bernadette. Julie, please.
Hello everyone, I'm Julie Glanville. I'm a co-convener of the IRMG and a co-author of the Searching for and Selecting Studies chapter of the handbook. I'm an independent consultant at the moment, but before becoming a consultant, I was the Associate Director at York Health Economics Consortium, where I managed reviews and an information service. And prior to that, I was Associate Director at the Centre for Reviews and Dissemination in the UK.
Thank you, Julie. Anne, please.
Hi, I'm Anne Littlewood. I'm a Cochrane Information Specialist. I've been a Cochrane Information Specialist for Cochrane Oral Health since 2008. I'm also the co-convener of the Information Specialist Executive within Cochrane, which is a committee that represents the views of information specialists across the wider organisation.
Thank you very much, Anne. And now Alison, please.
Hi, so I'm Alison Wheatman, one of the co-conveners. I started off as coordinator of the group from its inception in 2003 and became co-convener in 2005. As well as my methodological interests, I have been working on some public health Cochrane reviews as well. And I'm director of a specialist systematic review unit at Cardiff University called SURE, the Specialist Unit for Review Evidence.
Thank you very much, Alison. So now that the panel have introduced themselves, we're going to move on to the questions. We've got two general questions to start, which I'm going to take. One of them is, do you have to be a librarian or information specialist to be a member of the Cochrane Information Retrieval Methods Group? And the second one is, do I have to be actively involved in a Cochrane review already before I ask to become a member of IRMG? I'm going to take those two together because they're both related, and the answer to the same is yes. The idea is that anybody can become a member of our group. So no, you do not need to satisfy criteria such as being from a particular profession or being already involved in a Cochrane review. The idea of our group is that it exists for anyone from any profession with any level or degree of involvement in Cochrane who is interested in the searching for studies elements within evidence syntheses. So we welcome, of course, librarians and information specialists, but also researchers, clinicians, professions allied to medicine, people from industry. And I've noted that within the three events that we have today, we have a number of people from industry, database producers signed up, all of whom are very welcome. The next question is for Anne. Anne, the question is, I'm a Cochrane information specialist. Should I also become a member of IRMG?
Well, it's not a requirement that you become a member, but it is important that you stay up to date with the latest information retrieval methodologies, I think. So for me, I think it is quite an important thing that you do join. The important thing about it, I think, and as Carol has just said, is that it connects you to such a wide network of information specialists outside of Cochrane who are involved in all kinds of research projects. Their expertise and their knowledge can be very useful. And as a group, the Information Specialist Executive within Cochrane are working on ways to work more closely with IRMG so that the research topics that we're interested in as Cochrane Information Specialists get on their agenda as well. So I think you've got to be in it to win it, right? So yeah, so why not join? It doesn't cost you anything. You get access to a mailing list where there's lots of training advertised, and questions answered, and people come up with issues that they have with searching that get answered on the list and things like that. So I would definitely join.
Thank you very much, Anne. I'm glancing to see if we've had any questions come through in the question channel yet, and I don't see any questions. So I would encourage you, while we go through the questions that have been submitted in advance, as Chris says, please do submit your questions or raise your hands to be unmuted if you prefer to ask your question in person. So the next question that I'm going to go on to, just going down to my list here, is a question for Alison. I am being encouraged to do my own methodological research, but have never done any before. Do you have any advice on where to start and how to get started?
Right, thank you, Carol. Yeah, I think that I'm presuming here that the interest is in information retrieval methodological research, but my comments apply to all sorts really. I think the key thing to say would be led by your own interests, and even with support from work, doing additional methodological research can be quite a commitment. And I would certainly encourage you, if you're not already a member, to join one or more of the methods groups via the Cochrane Methods Network. The Information Retrieval Group, of course, is relevant. There are other groups that, as you'll discover during the day, that have a role for information research, adverse effects, the qualitative group, rapid reviews. Being a member of these networks will allow you to meet with like-minded people, discover some research partnerships, and get a feel for priority research topics as well.
Thank you very much, Alison. The next question is for Bernadette, and just scrolling down here. Can you give us some tips on how to identify synonyms or variants of selected, sorry, bear with me one minute. Just trying to get this to show in the main screen. Yeah, synonyms or variants of the selected keywords used in the search strategy. So I'll repeat the question. Can you give us some tips on how to identify synonyms or variants of the selected keywords used in the search strategy, please, Bernadette?
Yeah, I think this actually comes back to the part of the process that we would really call your question development. And it is a crucial part of planning your review process, because if your question falls down, obviously you're not going to get a decent review at the end. So when you have your initial title, your initial question, you need to be talking to your group, talking to your authors. You split that question into concepts. If it's an intervention question, you can use processes like PICO. Other synonyms are available for different kinds of questions. But once you've arranged your question into concepts, that's when you start to talk through what keywords, what synonyms, what variations you need in each of those concepts. That will start as part of the natural conversation. Speak to, presumably at least some of your team have an interest or an expertise in the area of the question that's been asked. So be guided by them to start with. So once you have a section, a selection of terms, are you aware, are your group aware of any papers that they know they already need to include? Collect those papers together. Once you've got those papers, you're looking for the terms that occur most often in the titles, the abstracts, the keywords of those articles. Remember, for most bibliographic databases, you're not searching the full text. So you're only looking for the terms which appear in titles, abstracts, keywords. That will add to your list. Look the papers up on databases such as Medline, and that will give you clues. It will tell you, be able to see how those papers have been indexed. It will give you more terms. If you look under the key, the headings that you find, you'll find lists of synonyms and lists of phrases that are included in those key headings. So as you're going on, you're compiling more and more terminology within those concept groups. There is a new world out there. I'm not going to go into it because it's not something I know a great deal about, but people are working on text mining solutions for this kind of question development, for looking for terminology. And what I would recommend you do, Cochrane has a searching handbook. The Cochrane handbook has a searching section, but not only that, there is a technical supplement to that searching chapter, which goes into quite a bit of detail about how to put your strategy together. And that has a nice little section on text mining. It'll give you some some articles to go and read and some tools to actually go and look at if that is your interest. But yeah, read, make dictionaries, read, and talk to people. I think that's...
Thank you, Bernadette. Just to add to that, the sections of the handbook technical supplement to which Bernadette's referring, section 3.2, I think, is the controlled vocabulary and text word section, and section 3.2.3 is a paragraph or several paragraphs about text mining for term selection. I'm looking again to see if we've had any questions come in from the audience. I don't see any in the questions channel. Chris, could you confirm whether anybody has had their hand up?
Carol, we are getting some questions coming through in the channel, actually. If you look, you may need to scroll down to see them. So onto the...
sorry.
So we've got a first one here from Moriam.
Bear with me a moment and I'll see if I... sorry, yes, right. No, I'm not... I'll have to look at that. I can just see like a half of the question. So bear with me, I'll sort that out. And in the meanwhile, I'm going to ask Julie, if I may, to answer one of the questions that came in previously. So the question, Julie, for you, is it acceptable to use search filters when conducting the search for systematic reviews? If it is, can you give us a source for high quality search filters?
Okay, thank you, Carol. Thank you for the question. I think it is acceptable to use high quality search filters for the purposes of systematic reviews, as long as you're sure that the filters are highly sensitive. So, for example, you don't use search filters that have maybe a sensitivity of 75%, because you would know then that 25% of your records were not, of the eligible records were potentially not being retrieved. So there are a range of search filters that are recommended in the handbook, in the new chapter in the handbook. And you can, I can't remember the section, but it's definitely there. So there's a range of Cochrane RCT filters, and if you're doing reviews of other topics, there are other filters in the other sections of the handbook that you might make use of. Where can you find filters? Well, obviously within the handbook there are some filters, but probably, and I speak with all sorts of conflicts of interest, probably one of the best places to look is the ISSG search filter resource. I will put the URL on the chat box in a moment. The ISSG search filter resource gathers together methodological search filters into a website and categorizes them according to the study design for which they're designed. So from there you can identify search filters, and you can also read about the performance of those filters in some cases in published reviews of filters, which you can also identify from the website. So that's a good place to start. There are also other websites with filters, and on the ISSG search filter resource webpage, you can find links out to other collections of filters as well. I'll put the web address up on the chat momentarily.
Thank you very much, Julie. And I think the section that you're referring into, the technical supplement, I think is section 3.6, but it is entitled Search Filters. So we'll now go to a question that's come in the question channel. Anne, I'm going to ask if you would answer this one, please. I'm going to read out the question to you all. How do you handle inexperienced author teams that are pressing you to start searching, although in your opinion, the PICO is not ready yet?
Yes, that is a perennial problem for the Cochrane information specialist. I think obviously there's a lot of guidance as to how to structure your PICO, and maybe directing them towards that would be helpful. There's certainly the handbook certainly has a section on that. But also I would say sometimes it's just worth talking them through the numbers. So if you kind of run a search the way that you want them, they want you to run it, and then tell them how many hits you've had, that can kind of focus minds a little bit and help them to see that I think the main issue that I have when this comes up is that the question isn't particularly focused. They tend to kind of have too much, a question that's too big to fit into a search. And I think, you know, trying to explain to an author team how search concepts work, the PICO structure is a very, very useful way of doing that. And I think you need to maybe sit down with them, hard to do that at the moment, maybe over a Zoom call, and think about, you know, just explain the numbers of hits that you get if you're discussing a question that's just too big.
Thank you very much, Anne. There's another question that we'll take from the questions channel. This, I think, is from Mai. Thank you for your question. How to evaluate a search strategy? Are there any sets of indicators for quantitative evaluation? We do talk about this within the Cochrane handbook. We talk about the fact that it is now strongly recommended within Cochrane that search strategies should be peer reviewed. And we talk about what's called the PRESS checklist. Again, we'll add the URL for this into the system later today. But PRESS stands for Peer Review of Electronic Search Strategies, and the PRESS evidence-based checklist, as the name suggests, is a checklist to enable not only for peer review, i.e. review by a peer of your search strategy, but it enables you yourself to use this checklist to check your search strategy. So we'll put that in the channel later today. Just going back to see what else we have. Okay, I'm now going to take another question from the ones that were sent through. This is a question for Bernadette. In which cases do you recommend to use MESH and or M-tree terms when conducting the search for systematic reviews? In which cases are the M-tree or MESH terms not helpful?
Yes. This it actually follows on from my last question quite nicely, really, because it's once you've got your terms listed, then the next step is to identify whatever control vocabulary is available in the databases that you're using. And we'll focus on MESH and the M-tree because that's what the questioner has asked. Some of you may be aware that Cochrane has a set of standards called Messier, which list what you have to do during a search for Cochrane and what is recommended that you do for a search in Cochrane. Identifying index terms is a mandatory phase. So why would that be? Basically, the difference between searching for a text term and searching for a subject heading, when you search a subject heading such as mesh, is that you're, instead of looking for specific words and phrases within the record, you're searching for an overarching concept. And I think the best way of explaining that and why you need to do that in all possible cases is a little analogy, if you'll bear with me. Let's say you're planning your child's birthday tea and you make a shopping list. And you write down on this shopping list everything that you think you want. So you're writing down cake, biscuits, crisps, sandwiches, and you get your shopping list is there and it's ready, and you're perfectly happy with it. So you put it in your pocket and you toddle off down the shop. So my local supermarket, when I get there, it has an aisle, and that aisle has an overarching label and it says party food. So I get to my party food aisle and everything that I have listed is in that aisle. So that is great, that's wonderful. But while I'm looking, all of a sudden I see, oh, there's shelves of things over here with a party food label on that I've never thought of. So the party food is the subject heading, if you like, and by finding that more general concept or a more overarching concept, you're starting to find things which you never actually thought of yourself, things that you may never have even heard of yourself. And that brings a much more efficient way of searching the databases. And remember, you're trying to find everything when you're searching for a systematic review. So your search needs to be as sensitive as feasible. So you need to use the headings. Now, there are occasions when you can't use the headings, and those are generally when the subject that you are searching for, it can be very new, or it can be very narrow. And by moving to a subject heading, you would be searching too broad a phrase. And I've actually a live example of that. In my real job, I was asked for a search 2 days ago, looking at an antiemetic drug called Akynzeo. Now, I went to Medline, I looked for Akynzeo. There is no subject heading. It maps to the heading vomiting, which is obviously far too broad. You don't want to move to that. And this is why you need to be using MESH and the M-tree as well, because then I went to Embase, which deals with drugs terms in a different way. Putting the term into the M-tree, it mapped to another drug name, to netopitant. And by doing that process, what I have discovered is that Akynzeo is actually a trade name. Netopitant is the generic drug name. So Embase has that M-tree term, which I can use. I then went back to Medline to try the generic drug name. Medline still doesn't have a heading. So it's only under those circumstances that I would not use and not include the subject heading terms for MESH, for the M-tree, and for any other system that another database is using. So I hope that's enough.
Thank you, Bernadette. That's very helpful. And the section in the handbook where we describe all this is, I think, section 3.2.1, and it's entitled Identifying Relevant Controlled Vocabulary. Chris, before I move to another question from the question channel, can I just ask you, do you see anybody with their hand raised who would like to speak?
No hands up at the moment, Carol. So people are happy to send text questions at the moment. So but happy to take any if anybody wants to be brave and raise their hand. Thanks.
Okay. So again, a question from the question channel. And I'm going to ask Julie to answer this, and I'm going to read the question out to you all. Julie, what is, according to you experts, thank you very much, the possible added value of artificial intelligence to support you in screening? For example, as additional reviewer, for quality control, etc. So it's artificial intelligence for screening.
Okay, thanks, Carol, and thank you, Naila, for asking the question. What's new in this year, in this edition of the Cochrane Handbook, is that the chapter on searching also contains information on selecting studies, and your question is really about whether techniques like machine learning and other forms of text mining and artificial intelligence can help us with the screening process. There has been in recent years quite a lot of research into whether machine learning can help us with the screening task. And in the handbook chapter, you will find some brief discussion of various tools that can help you with the screening process. I think we don't give you, there isn't a recommendation in the handbook to use one particular tool or to use one particular approach, but there is sort of just highlighting that these techniques are up and coming. If you want to read more about the sort of current state of the art of machine learning for screening, then there's a really nice review by Omara Eves and colleagues that I'll put up on the system in a moment. I think there are various ways that machine learning can help us potentially with screening. There is sort of filters that you can train to identify the studies you're interested in, and after a training period where you tell the package what you're interested in and also what you're not interested in, you can then set the program running on its own, and it will then prioritize the remaining records in your result set to try and surface the relevant records. So that's one way that machine learning potentially can help us with screening. There are also ways that you can use the software to highlight words of interest in records, so that as you look at records to screen them, you can see more clearly the keywords that are important in the record and help you more quickly decide whether something is relevant or not. The research that's been carried out has looked, for example, at replacing one of the screeners with a machine learning approach, so that one person could do the selection and the machine learning package could be the sort of checker, and it would highlight any gross differences in the selection. I'm not sure that anybody currently uses that in Cochrane reviews as their only way of doing screening, but I obviously don't know what goes on in all Cochrane reviews. But I think one of the things that we're trying to sort of highlight in the handbook is that increasingly there is going to be ways that we can make use of machine learning, artificial intelligence, text mining to help us make the screening process more efficient. So do read that section of the handbook. I think it's, obviously I think it's really interesting because I helped to write it, but it is a really interesting and exciting area, I think, for us in Cochrane reviewing.
Thank you very much, Julie, and I'm sure it's permitted to find your own work interesting. If you can't even find it interesting yourself, how can we expect others to? So I'm sure that's perfectly permitted. The next question is for Alison, please. Alison, which sources for the grey literature do you recommend? What do you think about using Google Scholar in searching for systematic reviews? And then we had another question on Google Scholar. Is Google Scholar the right platform for conducting the search for a systematic review?
Right, thank you, Carol. So I'll start with the grey literature, and I think Cochrane Handbook Chapter 4, Section 435, and in particular the technical supplement for S1. There's Section 117 on grey literature databases. Particularly useful. It depends rather on your subject area, But my personal top tips for grey literature searching are dissertations and theses, conference abstracts, HMIC, Health Management Information Consortium, if you have access, Open Grey, and very valuable to do reference list tracking as well of papers that you found from databases which are relevant. They often cite grey literature. But in this context as well, I think that I'll mention Microsoft Academic, which has an increasing, as with Google Scholar, has an increasing amount of grey literature, but it's more straightforward to download to reference management software. And also you can narrow it down to conference proceedings and to a term called other, which covers some grey literature as well. So I think that Microsoft Academic is becoming more useful in this respect as well. And then I'll move on to think about using Google Scholar. Yes, of course, Google Scholar has masses of information, and I've just had a quick look. Really, Google Scholar don't publish their size, but it was estimated as 389 million items in 2018, so you can only guess what it is now. Microsoft Academic is coming up behind with 234 million items in May 2020, and as I say, it has more literature, more grey literature as well. And that compares to Scopus, Web of Science, are around sort of 70 million mark, and PubMed around 30 million. So you can see these databases are absolutely vast. But the issue with Google Scholar is that it's more difficult to download. Results are more difficult to download to reference management software. You can do it, but it's quite tricky. It limits results to 1,000, and it doesn't disclose how the top 1,000 are selected either. And it produces quite a few duplicate citations. However, it is an absolutely vast database, and so there is information in there. But I think as a supplementary search, but certainly not as the primary search. Use the indexed abstracted databases where you can do really detailed searching and download to reference management software. So very much a supplementary search, I would say. Microsoft Academic is coming up behind with the more increasingly sophisticated search options. I don't know if there are any further questions.
Thank you very much, Alison. The section on general web searching, including search engines, Google Scholar, etc., is one of the sections of the handbook that has been greatly expanded this time. I think it's section 1.3.5 in the technical supplement, but the title of it is General Web Searching, including search engines, Google Scholar, etc. So, Julie, I'm going back to you now for a question that's coming through the questions channel. How do you think about the idea of an automation tool which helps developing a search query based on PICO or PCOS? I am trying to find a way to quantitatively measure the quality of search queries produced by the automation tool. Would you like me to read that again, or can you see the question?
Who's asked the question? I can see who's. Is it me you're asking this one for, Carol?
Yes, I'm asking you, Julie.
Okay, who's asked the question, Carol? I can see who. I can't see that question.
Sorry, I don't have the answer column is blank, but it begins with "Thank you very much for the answer for my previous question."
Oh, got you. I can see it. I can read it here. Okay, thank you. That's Mai again. Thank you, Mai, for that question. There are lots and lots of software tools, automation tools available that help us to develop queries. So they're not very well. It depends what you mean by an automation tool. So, for example, if we look at Ovid or if we look at Embase.com, they have inbuilt sort of interfaces that are structured to ask PICO questions and help you to think through your PICO elements, and they sort of offer you ways to expand your search as you put the headings in. So I'm not sure if that's automation as you're thinking about it. So there are already built-in interfaces. There are also lots and lots of text mining tools that help you to identify synonyms and phrases and words in proximity. And again, these are sort of help you to build your strategy, but don't sort of just take a search question and turn it into a strategy. There's packages like 2D search that you can put a search into, and it will run the search on various interfaces, but it won't then automatically increase your search. So there's a lot of packages and lots of software tools out there that will help you with automating your search a bit, but I'm not aware of a tool that if you fed it a question, it would come back with a detailed strategy. There are lots of tools though that you can use. I think we talk about quite a few of them in the handbook, but maybe I'm very happy, Mai, if you want to talk about this, and I'm not understanding your question very well. I'm very happy if you want to send me an email, and I can try and give you a bit more detail if you're able to sort of describe to me exactly what it is you're thinking of. But yeah, it's very hard. But I think, to your point, it's quite hard until we can do experiments in parallel, doing searches, whatever is the traditional way for you, compared to using automated tools. Until you can do both sort of in parallel and compare the results and see whether you found the same studies and whether you had to screen the same amount of studies. Until you can do that, we won't really know the answers to these questions. Otherwise, it's just our sort of gut feel, I suspect, about whether tools are helping us to do things that we used to do one way in a new way, and it's more efficient. It feels more efficient. So I don't know at the moment. I can see how you would investigate a new method versus one's current approach, but I guess I'm not aware of an automation tool where that's really been compared so far. But I'm very happy to talk offline about your particular question.
Thank you very much, Julie. And we have a question which I'm going to ask Anne to contribute to. Is the forthcoming scientific misconduct policy likely to change the way that Cochrane information specialists search for retractions when searching for a review? But before I hand that over to Anne, I just wanted to mention that again is a section that's been greatly expanded and updated in the Cochrane handbook. There's a section within the main text of the Cochrane handbook, but there's also section, I think it's 3.9 in the technical supplement. It's entitled Identifying Fraudulent Studies, Other Retracted Publications, Errata and Comments. This is something that I think we're all becoming much more aware of. It's a topic that I've been teaching in advanced searching courses for many years now, and I know that Anne, after having attended one of those courses, wrote an article for the Cochrane information specialists in their newsletter, drawing their attention to the importance of retractions. But just to repeat the question, Anne, is the forthcoming scientific misconduct policy likely to change the way that CISs search for retractions when searching for a review?
Thanks, Carol, and thanks, Sophie, for the question. It's a good question. So as Carol said, there are tips in the handbook about how to search for retractions, and I think it should be part of any Cochrane information specialist's sort of routine when they're doing a search. I think the conversations that we've had, certainly at the exec, about this were to do with the timing of it and when you should do these searches for retractions. And I think what we decided was to maybe incorporate it certainly when you're doing the searches initially, and also when you're topping up that search, because Cochrane reviews have to be, the search date has to be within 12 months of publication. So you will have to top up that search probably a few times, and it is worth doing a search for retractions whenever you're running the search. But also additionally, I always run a search just before publication. So if I get the review for signing off, I'll run a search then and just make sure that none of the included studies has been retracted in the meantime, because the last thing you want to do is to publish a Cochrane review with a trial in it that's been retracted due to error or fraud that you haven't picked up. So I think it's just good practice to think about when you run those searches, and just to bear in mind that a study can be retracted anytime. So just because you've done it when you've initially done the search doesn't mean that it shouldn't be repeated as you go through the process.
Right, thank you very much, Anne. So we'll now go back to the list of questions that we received in advance today. What do you think about searching in the MedNar database? That's MEDNAR. It seems to me that it gives a lot of non-relevant articles and documents. And Alison, you were going to answer the MedNar question for us.
Right, thank you, Carol. Yes, so for anybody who isn't familiar with this database, it uses a federated search technology called Deep Web. It works in real time, and it's certainly very fast. It allows Boolean logic, and it badges itself as a medically focused Google. But it would be really good to get others' views who use MedNar to share with us their views on this database. To my mind, I would tend to agree, having looked at it, with the question that it gives some non-relevant articles and documents. It's not possible to work out the ranking and why some studies are ranked at the top and given 5 stars. And it's also not clear to me which sources are searched either. So it would be really good to get views of others who have familiarity with this database. I do notice that it's being cited quite a bit as a search source by a number of reviews, but it strikes me, I'm very happy if others disagree. It has been around for quite a few years, but it's still not really mainstream as a searching database. So views would be welcome, and I think it's probably worth further evaluation.
Thank you, Alison. Chris, can I just check? Has anybody got their hand up?
Hi, Carol. Yeah, we've actually got some questions coming in, or a couple of questions coming in from Twitter, which are interesting. So let me just read those out. So this one is: what is one or two of the most helpful things a researcher can do to prepare for a meeting with a search specialist prior to starting a systematic review? So that might be one interesting one for different members of the panel to comment on.
I'm going to invite Anne to address that. Chris, could you repeat the question, please, for Anne?
Sure. So it's what is one or two most helpful things the researcher can do to prepare for a meeting with a search specialist prior to starting a systematic review? Thanks, Anne.
Wow, that's a fantastic question. I think some clarity over your question, really. Think about those, because the librarian can give you advice on how to search and what to search for a systematic review, but we're not clinical people, we're not experts necessarily in the subject area, although obviously you pick things up over the years. So I think having a good focused question and understanding what it is you want to achieve at the end. So what kind of review do you want to do? What kind of studies do you want to include? What is it that you want to find out, really, and really focus your thinking around that. And if you've got those sorts of ideas in your mind when you meet with a librarian, they can be very useful in helping you focus that even more, in helping you come up with search terms, in helping you decide which databases you need to search for whatever type of review you're doing. So I think just thinking around your question is very, very helpful.
Thank you very much, Anne. Chris, did you have anything else on Twitter that you'd like to share at the moment?
Yeah, there's another question that's come in, sort of general for all of you, really. What's kept you involved in Cochrane's work for so many years? There's another interesting one.
Okay, so who shall we start with? Let's start with Alison.
Okay, thank you. Right, I think that it is a very good question, because I think it's probably true that the vast majority of people involved with the Cochrane collaboration are doing a lot of work in their own time, not necessarily funded for it. And for myself, I think it's a marvelous organisation of huge enthusiasts who set extremely high standards for systematic review, and that's the primary thing that keeps me involved and interested. I think the standards for systematic review in Cochrane are extremely high, and it's an absolute pleasure to be involved, particularly on the methodology side of the information searching.
Thank you, Alison. Bernadette?
Yeah, good question. I fell into Cochrane by accident, essentially. As I mentioned at the beginning of this session, I'm actually employed as a librarian running a medical library service. And my initial contact with Cochrane 20 years ago now was purely because a member of our medical team wanted to support to do a review. And since that time, and it has been 20 years, it is, I think, the most satisfying, in some ways, the most satisfying part of my job. It allows me to become, to gather confidence and an expertise, I think. And I think what I like is that there's the whole Cochrane process in itself. I love going to the conferences, which we unfortunately haven't been able to do, and the colloquiums the last couple of years. Working with like-minded people, with people who are enthusiastic about evidence. And I always focus on the output. It's not an intellectual exercise. The whole point of this whole system is to improve people's health. And I've also found it's given me more confidence in the librarian profession. Health librarians, whether they're working in systematic reviews or not, do literature searching. They are a crucial part of the evidence system doing their job. And I think we're quite often, as a profession, overlooked. And I think or not appreciated rather than overlooked. And I think involvement with Cochrane has given me the confidence to sit at a table with consultants and professors and all the rest of it and say, no, I'm the expert here in this particular field. And it has raised the profile of the service in the organisation, and I just actually enjoy the whole process of finding things. I think it comes back to my original degrees in archaeology, and I'm still digging around in the dirt, if you like, to find those little bits of those gems.
Thank you, Bernadette. A very interesting word from our archaeologist. I didn't know that. Anne, what are you going to dig up from your past and excite us with?
Nothing quite so exciting as archaeology. I think there are two things for me. The first is that I still, after 12 years, find the work very interesting. It's just every day it brings a challenge of one kind or another. And the other thing is the people that I work with. The people who are involved in Cochrane are amazing. They've just got such knowledge, expertise. There's some great people. The information specialist community within Cochrane is fantastic. Really, really great people. And just that really, I suppose. It's a great place to work and it's a great thing to be a part of.
Thank you very much, Anne. Julie?
I think Bernadette, Alison, and Anne have really said so many things that resonate with me as well. But I just to add one sort of final thing, I think it's Cochrane's commitment, particularly from the information retrieval perspective, to advancing the methods in information retrieval research that really appeals to me. I mean, over the years, the way that, as Bernadette said, information is core to Cochrane work, but also the sort of efforts that Cochrane has put into trying to take forward things like bibliographic control, reflected in the development of Central, and also the sort of encouragement to look at new techniques and to look at methods all the time to try and help us do information retrieval in particular more efficiently. I think that's what really keeps me in Cochrane, is that commitment to looking forward, and the commitment to trying to make access to evidence more streamlined and more efficient.
Thank you, Julie. Well, I'll go last, and of course the advantage of going last is that everybody has already said what you were going to say, so you don't have much to add. It's certainly an interesting point from my perspective. For those of you who aren't aware, I was one of the founding, not founding fathers, founding mothers, I guess you could say, of Cochrane. When I joined Cochrane, there were 6 of us in Cochrane, and I don't know how many tens of thousands there are now. But when I first joined the UK Cochrane Centre, which predated the Cochrane collaboration, there were 3 qualified staff, including myself, and 4 administrative staff. So we started very, very small indeed. And what attracted me to that information specialist position there was the enormous potential that I could see for information specialists such as myself to become involved in an organisation that I felt really would make a difference. I know that sounds a bit naff, but that was really what it was. I think we do make a difference, and we make a difference across the board. So it doesn't depend on people's access to funds, it doesn't depend on how rich you are, it doesn't depend on your opportunities in life, in education or so. What it does depend on is getting the right answer for the population. And I think that was something that I felt I wanted to be involved in. That was in 1992, and that's why I'm still here. So, Chris, I don't see anything else in the questions box. We've still got a number of questions that came in advance, but firstly, has anyone got their hand up? And secondly, do you have anything else on Twitter?
Sorry, Carol. Yes, no, nothing else coming through on Twitter. We've got a couple of minutes left. So, yes, you're a call on if you want to take another question or two.
Okay, yeah, as you say, we're 2 minutes to the hour, so I'll just take one quick question and then hand back to you. We had a question: various segments and years of coverage exist in Ovid MEDLINE. For example, Ovid MEDLINE all, Ovid MEDLINE Epub ahead of print, Ovid MEDLINE and Epub ahead of print. I won't read them all out. Which one do you recommend to use while conducting the systematic review search? Yeah, I think that's a very important question. I'm going to refer you to the MEDLINE 2020 database guide, which we'll send out later today. You'll see that the first screen of that lists about 40 Ovid MEDLINE options, so it is sometimes a bit of a quandary which one to take. But advice from Ovid is that we should take the relatively new segment called MED-ALL. That's M for mother, E-D-A-L-L, MED-ALL. And that covers 1946 to the daily update. And the reason they say use that one is that if NLM ever makes any changes, which mean that they need to make any changes within their segment structure, it will always be called MED-ALL, irrespective of what the changes may be. So just to recap, which segment do you use? You should use MED-ALL.